Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining Open Theatre Session. I know it's the end of the day and I'm surprised more of you don't have a drink in hand. So bear with us for half an hour and then the stampede to the bar can begin. Someone's got one there. Today's Open Theatre Session is exploring how the intelligent use of automation can transform key parts of the financial crime agenda. Just introductions to the panel. Firstly, myself as moderator, so Andy Gillard from EY. I lead our intelligent automation solution for Asia Pacific. Andre Burrell is Microsoft's global financial crime lead in from Seattle for Cybos. So welcome, Andre. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.
John Tarkoff, welcome, who is Blue Prism's chief advocate, and up until very recently was Bank of New York Mellon's global head of performance excellence. And Bank of New York Mellon is, for example, one of Blue Prism's biggest customers globally. And finally, but by no means least, Scott Mandel, who's EY's Oceania financial crime leader. So we've got a few questions then, and we'll allow a bit of time for questions from all of you if you have any at the end. So firstly, a question for you, Scott. So what would you say some of the key things that are keeping FSIs awake at night when it comes to fin crime currently?
Yeah, in the financial crime landscape, it's interesting. We're facing unprecedented times today where you've got significant regulatory uncertainty.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of cost pressures that are happening there, and the cost of compliance itself is going through the roof. And so trying to balance all of those in that kind of environment can be a challenging exercise. But one of the things that I think are keeping our clients up, and I'd be interested in the panel's views on it, is the access to data that everybody has. The financial institutions are sitting on immense amounts of data, but the challenges that they're having is how do they distill information from that data? So you think about the responsibility that they have from a financial crimes perspective, where you've got regulators that are expecting them to be the first line to be able to identify financial crimes.
Yep.
And in many cases, they're having to parse through all of these different data sets. That is just untenable given the structure of their organizations.
Okay, Andre, what's your perspective on data and that challenge in particular?
Okay, so, well, first of all, if a bank is in New York, the chief compliance officer is up at night because they're facing potential personal liability if their system is deemed to be ineffective and they've certified that it is. And a lot of that will go back to their data. I used to be a chief compliance officer. There is more data in a bank. With bank data, I can create a complete profile about you. I can understand where your kids go to college, where you like to vacation, whether or not you're having an affair. Yes, it actually does show up. And so it's one of these situations where banks have more data than a lot of the big tech companies, but it's effectively dark because banks have grown up through mergers and acquisitions, and through that entire process, there's always a discussion about best in breed. We're going to go with this, and then 6 months later, everybody sort of moved on, and you have this silo, and the IT department is forced to try to make them talk to each other. So they have systems where they don't talk to each other, and I can be in 3 different systems with 3 different spellings of my name, and they cannot create the household.
Yeah. So data clearly changed. John, a perspective, and I mean, maybe sort of adding in just great process, given the extent of your process transformation background.
Yeah, and look, we're always going to have the challenges with these old financial institutions where you have tech stacks that number in the thousands. Each one of those tech stacks is going to touch data sets. Those data sets are going to have different attributes about those. And as we see that happening, we're also dealing with this piece of our environment where we have 3 types of data. We have, if we're lucky enough in retail, our data is very, very structured, and we can do a lot with that structured data. A survey that I've been conducting across about 300 companies, primarily North America based, shows that about 80% to 85% of the data in BFSI companies is unstructured to semi-structured. So now we're dealing with a whole raft of issues. One, just to be able to process the data, we can re-engineer the hell out of a process,
Yeah.
but as long as the data stays unstructured to semi-structured, the automation is going to be very limited. It also then contributes to the problem when we have to go try to find out what happened. When something goes bang in the middle of the night, you can't run automated sniffing tools to go find it because it breaks, it stops, because the data doesn't allow it to stay connected through the transaction lifecycle. So there are ways of doing it, but it creates a lot more work to be able to create those automated linkages, and it's not a one out-of-the-box solution set to do that.
Yeah, okay, so I'm pivoting to then kind of sort of automation and some of the kind of technologies that can add value to kind of help transform the fin crime agenda. Maybe John, sticking with you and giving your sort of, your sort of role at Blue Prism, clearly an unstructured data challenge, and maybe sort of, Andre, you can contribute to that in a second, given one of your focus areas. But where do you see technologies like robotics adding value?
Well, the Blue Prism platform is an amazing platform because it is just that. The whole construct around Blue Prism is to create a digital worker. So imagine yourself when you're sitting there thinking about why do we have so many employees in these old institutions? It's because we have to deal with all this unstructured data. The systems don't integrate together. So if we did, we'd have an SDP process for every single thing that we do, but we don't. So we have to stick human in the loops to be able to construct and reconstruct that SDP process. Well, what do they need to have? They need eyes, they need a brain to do some type of a logical way of recreating what is it that's wrong with the data and put it back in its right order, and then to pass it on downstream. So what Blue Prism allows us to do is to create the normal types of attributes and characteristics that a human has. The RPA platform provides hands-on keyboards. So then you begin to think, well, what do you need to do to either capture data? If a robot can't see it, what do you need? You need some type of data capturing device, like an OCR type of an engine that can read the data and reconstruct it, transform it, and put it into a structured format through a smart form technology, whether it's in workflow or some other way, and then put it in so the robots can actually do the work that we've given it the rules to do. You can extend the automation cognitively thinking now by giving it certain type of machine learning attributes or cognitive attributes so they can think, so they can actually go through more complex rule sets or decision-making types of activities that a base RPA platform like Blue Prism won't be able to do easily. So you can reconstruct what we ask human beings to do, which is very robotic-like, and you can actually build a digital workforce, and you can use cloud-based platforms, you can use the power of Azure and others to be able to give you those cognitive capabilities. And I think that's the real advantage that we have with a platform like Blue Prism and the power of Microsoft together.
Yeah, thanks, John. So Andre, what would you add to that?
So what I would say is that, one of the key things is when a bank undertakes something like this, do not just take your existing process and automate it. You have the opportunity to actually try to fix some of the deeper problems that are going on. For example, KYCs that are asking, how many ACH transactions are you going to do in a month? I mean, most people have no idea what an ACH transaction is. But more fundamentally, and it was alluded to, is that the technology is out there to use your phone to start onboarding a customer. You can take a picture of the ID. They will have them do certain things about moving their head to verify that it's a human being and not a movie or just a still picture. Then it can go into the system and do the sanction screening and start to load it into either Dynamics or whatever database the customer is using for KYC. But then actually that's where the real value starts to come, because the bank can, you've sort of set a line in the sand and you're saying from this day forward, this is how we're going to be dealing with it. So your data is going to be hopefully better, and your risk assessments will evolve to something much more meaningful than what generally exists in a bank when it comes to anti-money laundering. You're not going to just look at the product, the service, the geography. You're going to have some contextual information of like, oh yes, I said I was going to do a wire, but I've only done one in a year, and it was for $100 because I had to pay someone. That is a much more meaningful way to score someone than to say, well, Andre said he's going to do wires, therefore he's high risk, and now we have to do complete EDD on him. That's not a good use of anyone's time. So in addition to the visualization, the automation from robotic process automation, it's putting it into the cloud and actually taking it then and being able to visualize it using graph technology and be able to identify households. That's something a lot of banks struggle with, truly identifying a household, because you have people who are married or may not be married, living in the same household, and you're trying to say, okay, is this an economic unit that we're dealing with as a bank or not? And graphically, it can help a lot for the human beings to be able to see it and make some assessment.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks, Andre. And Scott, chip in, please.
Yeah, no, thank you. Apologies for that. I think there's an important point there, especially as kind of the non-technologist of the panel, if you will, that when you think about the area of financial crime and you start taking into consideration the risk appetite of an organization, typically the risk appetite for financial crime is zero, right? Which is a very difficult, if not impossible, thing to attain. And so what banks have been doing for the longest time is just throwing bodies at it. Yeah. Right? It becomes a brute force exercise, and you can't have enough people to work through it. And so they've never had the opportunity to step back and say, is this the right process? And then is there a standardized process by which we can go off of? So, to be able to go to this level of being able to automate, you've got to have a baseline from where you're starting with saying, this is what good looks like. They were referring to it before. And so we're encouraging clients to make sure that they take that step back and understand what is it that they're trying to solve for, what's the process that needs to be undertaken in order to be able to do it. Because more often than not, they haven't had the opportunity to do that in the recent past.
And all three of you, thanks Scott, so all three of you have spent in recent times and sort of over the years a lot of time engaging with financial services organisations all over the world, and banks in particular, their cost pressures are not going away, and in fact they're sort of intensifying, and maybe sort of sticking with you, sort of Scott, clearly balancing the need to invest in adhering to regulations, arguably sort of exceeding kind of the standards set by regulations with productivity targets, let's call them what they probably are, is not easy. So from your engagement, in the US and recently you've moved over to Asia Pacific, in the Asia Pacific market, any observations?
Yeah, look, nobody's going to go to a regulator and say, well, we didn't want to spend enough money, and so that's why we missed something, right? So it is an area where there's going to want to be an appetite for investment. But what we encourage is intelligent investment, right? Making sure that what you're investing in is going to help move the needle in the direction that you like. And so what a lot of people are starting to do, especially in an area like Oceania here, is taking the lessons learned from other regions of the globe, because that's what the regulators are looking at, right? You look at what's happening in the US, what's happening in EMEA, you've got these horizontal reviews where they're continuing to find the best practice from different organizations. And I like to refer to it as the Frankenstein bank, right? It's the best of all of them, but there's nobody that actually does all of it together. And so it's important for them to make sure that they're getting some of those perspectives of what is it that others are doing, why are they doing it, and how could they leverage it in their environment.
Thanks. John, you've been on the receiving end of
I have been, yes, and I love when I get to spend money, trying to make things more productive and also trying to reduce risk. And two real life examples. When you're dealing with automation and you're putting automation in a process, and even though you may still have human in the loop, one of the very interesting things that happened to us when we started automating, extending automation across the normal segmentation lines where you have to have segregation of duties. One of the really cool things that happened is the controllers came up and said, well, wait a minute, you can't do that because you need two separate managers. And my team and I said, well, hold on a second. We named all of our robots after our founder, Alexander Hamilton. I said, why does Alex need to have a manager? Why can't he cross management lines? Because a robot sits in the data farm, he's sitting in a VMX environment, there's no collusion. You set up segregation of duty responsibilities so that department, those people can't collude with this department, and they can't do bad things to each other or with each other. But Alex is just working across there, and there's no need to have that supervisionary line. It was like a paradigm shift that was a very cold water shower. And it's these kind of things that begin to change the way that people think about processes, the way you look at your organizational structure, and actually we rewrote a lot of our control manuals because we changed the way that now automation that takes away the need for that. The second one is 4-eye checks. When you're using automation where the robots have already proven that they're not making mistakes, why do you 4-eye check it? So we had to use statistical tabling and things to prove, and eventually you might do sampling and you might say, okay, in order to you get comfortable, keep going ahead, but you're not going to find any mistakes. And we even got so much, we had a new control policy written that the robots were allowed to do 4-eye checks. And I said, so a robot is going to check another robot. Okay, I'm not sure what that's going to prove, but these are the kinds of things that, again, through maturity curve, organizations will move up that curve until they're more comfortable. And we had to teach regulators the same thing as well, at least in the US. But they're moving in that direction, so everybody's kind of learning at the same pace.
Yeah, but one of the things that I don't think we can lose sight of, because technology is not going to solve everything, we have to talk fundamentally about the cultures within banks.
Sure.
You know, we have to get people to focus on the fact, you know, that data is important and that, you know, we as institutions need to be more data driven and fundamentally enable them to develop the skills that they have. Because look, at the end of the day, banks are not going to be able to go out and compete against Microsoft or Google or any of the other people for data scientists. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, because it's part of it's the cool factor. You know, the banks I know are having some problems keeping data scientists, and so it's changing the culture and saying what we're doing is actually pretty cool. It's that it's critical to what we do as an institution, and that, you know, from the top down, it's a message that's delivered. Because I've seen, I mean, look, we're all old enough to see plenty of implementations of automation and see them fail dramatically. And a lot of it goes back to there was no cultural buy-in. There was no executive sponsor who really had the power and the budget. So until you solve those problems, good luck with the technology.
And poor process, to some of the earlier point, and data limitations as well. You mentioned a couple of large technology organizations in addition to yourself, sort of, Andre. So, you know, organizations like Google, Amazon, Alibaba, sort of Tencent, and sort of many others have in recent times fundamentally redefined what great customer experience is. And as a result, you know, banks customers and any sort of customer of any organization have increasingly unrelating expectations. And what do you see some of the challenges are and the role maybe that technology can play with not constraining or getting in the way of a great customer experience? So balancing great customer experience with compliance and sort of regulation is not always easy, and technology automation can play a part in that. So observations.
So
with
partially
you, Andre.
just looking at it from a customer's perspective.
Yeah.
Because if I go into my bank and want a mortgage and they tell me I have to produce 6 months of bank statements, I look at them like they're crazy. Like, you have them, go pull them. I mean, yes, I may need to sign a document, but that is absolutely ridiculous, and that is a horrible customer experience. Or if you have, you know, children who have their accounts, and, you know, now they're sort of aging, and, you know, they may need to go under your umbrella of your accounts. That should be an opportunity for the bank to reach out and say, hey, happy birthday to your child. Come on in, let's talk about it, and, you know, we can help set up an account. Because at the end of the day, you know, my kids, all of our kids, that generation's different. If they don't see us being wedded to our institution and actually being able to say we get good service, they're going to change. They're going to find somebody who does it. And, you know, the banks have a chance now to do it, and they have the data, so do it.
Scott, any perspectives?
Yeah,
Thanks,
you know,
Andre.
it's interesting. I was listening to a panel earlier today that was hitting on this related topic, and it was talking about data sharing. Certainly there are laws and regulations out there around data sharing, GDPR, et cetera, that constrains what it is that can be shared. But the view from the regulators was actually the greatest detriment and impediment to data sharing is actually cultural. Is that there is some level of power and control over having data. There is some level of uncertainty about what can be shared, and so that more often than not, whether it be countries, whether it be banks, or even divisions within banks themselves, are not sharing data that they have access to just because they think that they can, but nobody's actually asked the question, and then they'd be able to leverage it in a more powerful way, like Andre said.
Cool. John, any perspectives?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the biggest thing that I saw when we were working with this, where we were trying to build automation components to offset the debt that they had built up over the years, where they decided it was too expensive to make it easy for clients to talk to each other.
Yeah.
So they just said, well, you have to send it in this way, and then we just hired a whole bunch of people to be translators. Yeah. And then we started creating automation solutions using IA technology because it was cheaper and secure to then undo all of that. And then the crazy thing came out where we got a phone call that said, well, we want our bots to talk to your bots. And it completely blew everybody's mind because it got them back to thinking about, well, why didn't we fix this years ago?
Yeah.
And again, because the cultures were such, the whole idea that they were going to use, again, remember, it's just software. I have to keep saying that. But we have this Hollywood effect about robots. So the robots were going to talk to each other in place of fixing the real platforms, and they were actually going to start sending the data in a way that could be ingested in a way that was going to speed everything up. Yeah. That was really cool. It wasn't a big deal for the rest of us who were on the front lines going, guys, you should have been doing this all along. Now we just have a piece of technology, we can build the solution for $50,000, right? Instead of putting a couple zeros on the end of that. Yeah. And again, I think that's where, again, it reduces risk, errors, all the things that we know that happen. And it allows us now to actually make the customer, our customers are big institutions, so it now allows the customers now to be much happier with dealing with us. But it took us to get to this point to do it, and using technology that probably was always available. But
hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Yes.
So last question before we open it up to questions if there are any. So the nirvana, of course, is probably to transform your think prime agenda, fix your processes, get great data, and then buy an out-of-the-box technology solution and just let it run. Yeah, we'll see whether any institution ever achieves that in our lifetimes. So, out-of-the-box solutions. So let's assume you've got great processes, your processes in order. Let's assume you've got sort of great data, the right data at the right time. Whether it's around combining robotics with machine learning or sort of other out-of-the-box solutions. Is it realistic to buy an out-of-the-box solution ultimately? Or is there still a lot of tailing required based on the jurisdictions you're in, your organization's business model, your system architecture? So it'd be great to close on that perspective. So start with you, Andre,
right.
please.
So it depends on where the bank is in, and I hate to use this phrase, but in their digital transformation. Because fundamentally, the further along you are, the easier it is to do certain things. But at the end of the day, even if you're going to be buying, let's say there's a data mart for machine learning models for anti-money laundering, you're still going to need to run your data through it and train it and make sure that it's working for you. Each bank is unique, and as much as we'd like to say one size fits all, it doesn't. There are unique aspects to each, and so there's always going to be bespoke solutions. The trick is not to overdo it.
Okay. John, a perspective?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that, the Shangri-La of waking up and buying bank in a box, plugging it in, everything runs, it's transformative, it takes our old tech stacks, sunsets all of our old applications and our hardware. I don't see that coming anytime soon. I do think there's great platforms that you can combine those platforms. You can combine translation engines. You can use intelligent cognitive tools along with an RPA platform like ours, and you can do a lot more today than what you've ever been able to do, and you can do it a lot less expensively in a shorter time frame, still building with confidence to meet the regulatory needs, meet your cultural demands of your own risk and legal teams inside of your organizations. Something we haven't really ever seen, at least in my lifetime of running transformations for major financial institutions. This is something that I wish we would have had 20 years ago. We
Yeah.
haven't. Now we do, and we're being able to do a lot more than what we've been seeing in the past.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah,
John.
you know,
Scott?
I think
finally.
there's certainly enablers and accelerators out there. Look, by their very nature, banks tend to be very conservative, especially as it comes to areas like financial crime, fraud, AML. Everybody is very concerned about their own money and where it's sitting and the risk that it's being put at. So I think you're always going to have to work at that. I think the other piece of it is there's a human aspect to this that needs to be fed into it, to where this is going to be supporting that. And you can repoint people into more value-added tasks, right? Some of the more complexities that are out there. And then how you handle the regulator, kind of conversation, the interaction with senior management, reaching out to customers. So it's important that it be kind of a part of the solution and not just the solution.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Any questions for the panel? Yeah, we haven't got an additional mic, so shout, please.
There seems to be a case for collaborating to solve financial crime problems using technology. So,
Yeah.
for example, sharing KYC.
Yeah.
Do you see that being something that will happen in the industry, or is it just too hard?
Should we start, Scott? Do you want to take that one to start with?
So we've been having conversations on regions across the globe around utilities, leveraging things like blockchain, but really trying to pool data together, essentially, that people have access to minimize the impact to customers, but also to be able to leverage the power of all that data into information. Again, as it relates to regulations, data privacy, et cetera, I think there's challenges to that. I personally believe that there is a real aspect of that. And so as a firm and kind of as alliances, as we sit up here, kind of and working with regulators as well as other organizations, we're trying to figure out how we can push that agenda. Because I agree, I think it's a great opportunity in the market.
And I think I sat on a consortium when I was at BNY Mellon. There is a real drive for the golden source of golden sources. And blockchain is really going to be the thing, I think. If they can get blockchain beyond these focused blockchain type of implementations where they're very specific kind of scenarios and get it to something on a bigger scale, you're going to have it anyway. It won't work. It has to be in that kind of a single global source type of scenario. I think that's going to be, if anything's going to drive it, it'll be that kind of you need that type of wedge in to break up these old, stodgy, we got ours, you got yours, we shall never talk to each other. That will break that.
Thanks, John. Andre, perspective?
At the end of the day, I have my doubts that I'll see it in my lifetime in the U.S. just because of the nature of banking in the U.S. I see it happening in other regions of the world, and I see the regulators in other regions actually pushing for institutions to do this. Not so much at the retail level, but at the small, medium-sized business or corporate level. So, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? I think we've got a couple of minutes left. And definitely don't want to get in the way of the bar. So.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
Is that, as you go through this technological change, involve your regulator. Look, I used to be one, and the worst thing you can do is, go down this whole path, and then, come exam time, they're showing up, and they're saying, oh, look at this new system, and they had no idea you were doing it. It doesn't mean it was bad, but they're going to have a whole lot more questions versus if you involve them along the way. They're never going to say, yeah, that's good technology or bad technology, but if they're going to have questions, better to have it while you're developing it than at the end of the day, and you're going to have to rip it all out and redo it or run it in parallel for over a year until they're happy with what you've done.
Thanks, Andre. Look, so hopefully all of you found that valuable. So whether it's the application of robotics, the application of machine learning, cognitive, combining the two together, simply fixing your processes and fixing your data, so automating it intelligently to help transform the financial crime agenda. Hopefully you find that valuable. So thank you, Andre, from Microsoft, John from Blue Prism, two major global alliance partners of EY, and finally to Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.